Okay, hello and welcome once again to the accidentally named Free Thought Blog's Podish-Sortacast, where people who are used to writing instead try to talk live on camera. As you can see, I'm already bumbling it. Okay, so we've talked a lot in recent Sortacasts about justice and the lack thereof, about everything that's wrong and why it's wrong. Today, we're going to discuss the path to hopefully making things less wrong, activism. So today we have, let me first mention Abby, who is not here, but provided the introduction for this whole event. But we also have Christian, we have HJ, we have William, we have Sarah, we have a guest, Stephanie, and Cryptike. And I will let you guys go ahead and introduce yourselves at this point. So we'll start with Christian.
Yeah, well, I'm guessing introducing in relating to activism. I'm one of those people who are not much in front, but I try to help organize activism. So I'm more of an organizing kind. But I'm very much involved in political activism in Denmark, and there's this thing called blogging that occasionally also spills over in the activism. So that's it.
Okay, and HJ, who is doing all the technical stuff behind the scenes for us, you have a moment to say a word.
A word. Yeah, just busy with technical stuff and all that. I do have a blog. I promise I'll get back to it at some point. That point is not today, and probably not for the next week or so, because, you know, camping takes precedence. Yes.
Okay. William.
Yeah, William Brinkman. I do the Bolingbrook Babbler. I've been slacking on updates lately, but I'm hoping to change that next week. And in terms of activism, I'm involved with the Representative Sean Castan's campaign, and I've worked with political campaigns in the past and been involved in skeptical activism and political activism in the past as well. So I'm looking forward to this.
Okay, and everybody has to stop making apologies for not blogging. It's okay. You got other things going on. That's perfectly acceptable. All right, Sarah.
Hello, I'm from the UK. I have the blog Geeky Humanist on Free Thought Blogs, and I'm someone who would like to get more involved in activism because, as we all know, it's important.
Okay, Cryptike.
So I'm an old hat at activism. I definitely come more from the direct action school, but of course I endorse and embrace a wide variety of forms of activism. And I'm hoping to talk about 35 years of activism this afternoon.
We're not going to have time for anyone else, but that's okay.
Well, I'll gladly stand down.
No. And I don't know what activism is, so I'm going to just turn it over to Stephanie to start us off and tell us what all this is and introduce herself, of course.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Zavan. I used to technically, probably still do because I haven't closed it down, but blog at Almost Diamonds, which used to be on Free Thought Blogs. Probably part of the reason that I am not blogging these days is that I'm currently president of Minnesota Atheists. I am treasurer for Secular Woman. I've been volunteering for Skepticon. I have one or two things going on in my hometown of Minneapolis that are fairly important from an activism point of view. And I have been one of the few people who really pushed the atheist organizations to get better, who then stuck around. I won't say I didn't burn out. No, I'll say I'm recovering still. But I have some good news on that front. So I'll hopefully share that a bit as we get into this.
All right. So I guess the first question I would have for Stephanie is, what is activism and how do we do it? And are we doing it now or not?
Simple questions.
Yeah, yeah, there goes the hour, but okay.
So activism is activities that preferably in a real way bring about the world that you want to see. We are doing activism now. I don't know exactly how effective this particular piece of activism is. It's one of those things that's kind of hard to gauge in the present. There are some things, some forms of activism that are much easier to say this is effective while you're doing them. But creating media is very much a hit or miss kind of activism, but that doesn't mean it's not important. Are we doing activism now? You asked me too many questions. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and you've forgotten them all already. Oh, well.
Already. I know there was a third one in there.
No, yeah, I've forgotten it, but I'm old, so it's excusable.
So basically, activism can encompass lots of things. In the atheist movement, we're super used to seeing court cases, which with the current courts may no longer be a very effective way of doing activism. There's been some really good activism, legal activism out of the atheist movement. There's been some not very effective legal activism out of the atheist movement. And when I say not very effective, I mean we've lost a lot of court cases. We're not in it to do those because those set precedent too. But it is a risk of doing it, of suing. I will mention that the Satanic Temple is not doing effective legal activism within atheism. And there's a lot to say there, but that's not necessarily something we need to do. Just know that when you see Satanic Temple is doing such and such to challenge this, they're not really legal activists. They're theater activists, which is a thing and sometimes effective, but they're not effective legal activists. There is community building, which is part of what we're doing in Minnesota Atheists. And oh boy, has that been challenging through the pandemic, but we're still working on it and we're able to get back to some of our older tactics. We were just back at Convergence this year, throwing a party room with science experiments. We missed 2PZ. We missed
next
the
year.
spiders.
Next year, I promise I'll be there.
And her owl pellets. Okay, we'll hold you to that. There is mutual aid, which is a thing that we have not really gotten good at as an atheist movement, but it's absolutely okay to just support other people's mutual aid groups. You don't necessarily need to do that through the atheist movement. What else is there? There's political activism. That's one of the things where the organizations, particularly the national organizations, have gotten a whole lot better in the past few years. And we can go more into that and why even when it feels useless, you should do political activism, in part because it doesn't take very much of your time as an individual. So yeah, lots of different ways to do activism.
Okay, we've got a question here, and I want to elaborate on it a little bit. So the question is, what's good and what is bad activism? And can you give us examples of that? I mean, you mentioned the Satanic Temple. Would you call that bad activism, or would you just say, yeah, it's not going in a very productive direction?
Losing lawsuits is bad activism.
Okay.
Being a constant threat to Christian nationalists in kind of a funny way might be good activism. It certainly keeps some people within the atheist movement motivated in ways that slightly more boring activism doesn't. This is also something you do, PZ, as a blogger, despite saying you're not an activist.
Oh,
You keep
okay.
people focused on the issue.
Yeah, I like how you phrased it as theatrical activism, and that seems like a good label for some of the things some people do. So,
well, and it can be super effective. And I'm
Yeah.
guessing Cryptike has some wonderful things to say about theatrical activism, having done more direct activism than I have.
yeah, so maybe we ought to turn this over to Cryptike for a little bit. She's got a lot of years to cover in the next few minutes.
I do, yeah. So just kind of back to what is activism, I think that to add to what's already been said, and maybe this will help get a little bit more clarity, although it also causes problems because boundaries have been blurred over the years. If we go back to some of the definitions that were used, Thoreau, Gandhi, activism is an attempt to interact face-to-face with somebody in ways that change a current status quo dynamic or social situation. And certainly that can include things like going to vote because you interact face-to-face with members of your community. But historically, voting and direct participation in the democratic process has not been viewed as activism. That's a separate category of working for change. Not bad, not worse, not necessarily better, but a different category. So there's direct interaction with people in your social milieu in order to change a current status quo, whether it's a current situation or a current dynamic. And there are lots of ways to do that through education, and theater is one of those ways in which we do education. But also sometimes all it takes to change a current social situation. For instance, if you're worried that some marginalized community members don't feel supported, right? And so there might be fear, there might be discomfort at participating in your community. Simply having a march where 500 people come together and they walk down the street together and they say, we're here for you. That might be all that it takes to change the social situation of this individual group, from people who are worried because they don't know if anybody's got their backs to people who are confident and therefore able to participate in their community, right? So those things are traditionally more viewed as attached to activism. This doesn't mean that fighting legal court cases is not activism. The definition's been broadened. And of course, there are things at the margins. And certainly, there are ways in which multiple things can be true at the same time, right? So if you're in a court case and you're functioning as a lawyer and you're advocating for a particular outcome before a judge, in some definitions of activism that might not be called activism, but you're also actively interacting with a judge and trying to convince them of the correctness of your position, right? And so when you're trying to convince them of the correctness of your position in this face-to-face way, it is activism. It's activism restricted by the boundaries of acceptable communication and interaction in the court system, but how you're interacting with that judge is direct. And so these definitions fail at various boundary points, but I think that that's kind of an initial foray into activism. And then my activism covers that basic, simply being present out in front to support community members back when I was in high school, to doing theatrical activism. As Stephanie was talking about, I was a member of the Lesbian Avengers for a number of years, and the Lesbian Avengers are famously theatrical, right? We'd light torches and eat fire and do little morality plays of street theater in front of audiences who aren't necessarily anticipating that there'll be somebody with street theater going on. And of course, that can also have multiple goals in terms of whether or not you're just there to educate or whether or not you're there for some other purpose, but that's definitely activism. And then I've also done work where you're knocking on a door on behalf of a candidate or a ballot measure, which is certainly, we talked about how these boundaries kind of get confused. Like if direct democracy, where you're actually voting, isn't in itself considered activism, it's considered democracy, right? It's considered something else, not bad, again, just something else. But nonetheless, when you go to somebody's door, knock on it and talk to them, that is the direct interaction with your community members in order to change a social status quo. And so that certainly counts as activism. I've done that sort of thing. So there's a wide variety of different ways you could do it. And then, of course, there's the classic Gandhian Dr. King activism to provoke a response, right? This comes out of Thoreau originally, but the activism to provoke a response. And so these various different forms of activism, and there are others, have all been part of what I've been doing for the last 35 years.
Okay. Do either of our European participants want to throw in something about what's going on the other side of the Atlantic? What kind of activism do you do there?
Well, I mean, we do pretty much the same. We just don't have quite the same extremes, and even that is dependent on where you are in Europe. I mean, the US is a little bit of an extreme example because it's so large, and the extremes are so big. But there are a lot of activism that's still necessary. There's a lot of anti-immigration hatred. There's a lot of transphobia is rising ugly head, especially in the UK, but also starting showing up in Denmark. So it's necessary. I mean, I would say there's kind of two kind of activism. You can try to move forward, but you can also try to damage control. And I'm involved in kind of both kinds of action, where I try to get laws changed, but also I try to make sure laws don't get changed, if that makes sense. And so that's why I'm working very much political, with trying to get certain candidates and certain parties into the forefront. But I also try to help organizations, and sometimes, like as I said, sometimes through blogging. I wrote something recently about a LGBT organization in Denmark. That's an anti-trans organization that was created by the far right, and that actually is being used in the Danish debate to kind of push back on that organization. So when somebody mentioned, oh, that they're just going against the brokenness, the answer is here, and well, no, those are far right politicians disguised as an organization. So I mean, that's the kind of stuff we're dealing. And Sarah could probably tell more about it in the UK, which is an even weirder kettle of fish.
Yeah, Sarah, what do you have to say?
Nothing very inspiring, I'm afraid, because of personal circumstances, I've not been able to be particularly active in anything over the past many years of my life, and I'm hoping that that's something that can change more. But it's one of those things where it's difficult to know where and how to start. I mean, I'm someone who tries to do these things in small ways by speaking up. If I hear someone passing on the sort of bigoted myths about people or groups that get passed on, I'll speak up, I'll say something, and maybe it'll change, if not their mind, the mind of someone else who's listening. And it's something that, so I try and do things in little ways that way. But the question is how I can get more involved with such things when I'm not someone who's I'm not in much of a position to go out and go on marches. I think I should write to my MP now, but more often that my MP is not someone I'm massively competent in. Sorry, that's Member of Parliament for anyone who doesn't have the same terminology. And I'm thinking, well, in terms of activism, what can I myself actually do? Donate to organisations, that's something I can do. But what have people got in the way of suggestions for an activist looking to get started?
That's a good question. Maybe we should let William speak up first, and then let's pursue that question. What can we do to get started? William, what's your story?
My story. Well, I was involved in student activism way back in college. I'm probably dating myself, probably around the same time that Crip Dyke was involved. So you can like join organizations. I would say activism takes on many forms, and at the very least, you can like bring writing to your MP is good, just to let them know that, hey, there's someone who disagrees with their incompetent position. That's a start. And blogging as a form of education to encourage people to be more active, that I consider that a form of activism. More direct action, yeah, that's fine. And there are after the 2016 election in the United States, a lot of groups popped up in the Chicago suburbs, which was unheard of because it was a Republican stronghold for years. And they managed to, and that through like demonstrations, not civil disobedience, but through demonstrations, organizing, they managed to flip a lot of representative seats and pretty much gave, for a while, the Democratic Party a lot of leadership positions in the collar counties and the collar suburbs and DuPage, which is amazing. So yeah, I mean, look for groups, or even at the very least, be open about a position. Like I'm involved with Koldash, which is a humanistic Jewish congregation, and just the fact that it exists and it's open is letting people know that there is a secular alternative, and it's not this, that there's secular organizations and they're not the wild Christian nationalist stereotypes of atheists, that there are people in the community that is a form of activism. So yeah, hopefully that's some good ideas where to start.
Okay, well then let's open up this question to our whole panel. So let's imagine that there's somebody listening to us right now who is very naive and doesn't know what to do, but knows that there are things that are wrong in the world. How do you get started fixing all those bad things?
I would say the first thing to do is to spend a little time with yourself and get over the idea that you are going to save the world, you personally, that you have that your ideas on how to do activism are really super important. And this sounds like I'm talking down to people, but honestly, this is kind of freeing. I mean, if you understand that every organization that is put together to work on something like requires administrative work, requires somebody to fill out their paperwork if they get grants, if they want to apply for grants, if they have reporting requirements to the state. There are lots of people who have done this for a long, long time, and the reason that they haven't gotten ahead is not because they don't know what they're doing, but because they're hugely under-resourced compared to particularly corporate interests, which is a lot of what we're fighting against, but also churches. Churches get a lot more money than most of your standard small community organizations. So, you know, consider that your community organization is one of those places where you can make a big difference by doing something small. Maybe it's giving some money, maybe it's giving a little bit of time, maybe it's just signing up for their newsletters so you know when something important comes up in front of the city or in front of the state, and you can add your voice to theirs. You don't have to start from scratch. I do a lot of things, but I do a lot of things because I don't focus very well and I get bored easily. So.
Anyone else?
I tried to raise my hand in an attempt to be civilized.
Yeah, I see it. Okay, yeah, go ahead.
I completely agree with Stephanie, and I think there's a couple of things that's very important. There's a lot fewer people active than you believe. as a general organization. So any organization have a lot of members, but it's the same 15 people showing up raising FFA. So even if you could do just 1 or 2 events, help organizing that would be a huge help. It would mean somebody else can relax for that event and just have, just focus on the activism, so to speak. So because people always have this impression that all these organizations, there are always so many people doing it, but it's the same 15 people, 20 people, how many people? 10, 5, even some places. So and it's really important that if you can step in and try to help, because it also helps avoiding burnout for other people. And the second part I also think is important. You can also just do minor support. Sometimes a small thing that you do can actually make a difference. I talked to one of the big feminist rock stars in I mean, not rock star in the musical sense, but in the kind of personal sense in Denmark. And she actually knew who I was because I've been doing some blogging and some numbers and doing some number crushing that she could refer to, which saved her a lot of trouble, because if there's a white guy writing something, it's much more true if if a young woman says so on the stage or something. So in that sense, even small things can sometimes help, but just sometimes talk to people, see, is there anything I can do to support you writing this blog post, or even just collecting some numbers. I mean, doing the research for people can also be a help. So that was
to tack on to that. It's really good to understand your position in society. People will tell you to we're mostly over this, but people would tell you at some point to check your privilege. But understanding how you as a person function in society. For example, I am a cis het middle-aged white woman who speaks with the barest of regional accents, all that kind of thing, which puts me distinctly in the Karen class, which means I don't have the Karen haircut. But anyway, I'm short the haircut. Aside from that, I'm really the kind of person who people will look to decide what is okay and is not okay in society. So if I say something a little mildly radical in a space that isn't radical, that has more weight. If I say, you should listen to these people, they're saying something really bright, that has more weight. If I'm saying, no, this person belongs here, it's all good, that has more weight just because of who I am. I'm in that class of people that folks have decided are an arbiter of societal rules. And it looks like Cryptike has something to add.
So this is a story I've told a couple times before, and I'm sure that I've put the story on Pervert Justice, but one of the things that I think is important to remember is that we absolutely have to have a multifaceted approach to activism, right? And the kind of insider credibility that Stephanie is speaking to is incredibly important. I was involved, as I said, in the Lesbian Avengers in the early mid-90s. And there was a time when there was a horrible bill proposed. The details I'll skip. No, I won't, because we have to say the chant. The bill was to make it illegal for a woman to access IVF unless she was either married or petitioned for permission from the state. And if she was married, she had to get permission from her husband. If she was not married, she had to get permission from the state to access fertility interventions to help her get pregnant, right? So this guy who introduced the bill was told over and over again by other people, including the first out lesbian in the Oregon legislature, that this was a ridiculous bill, it was a horrible bill, trampled all over constitutional freedoms. It was not okay, and he had to kill it. This was not going to move forward. And for weeks and weeks, he refused to pull it, and it was actually getting a committee hearing. And so the Lesbian Avengers put some signs together, put some posters together. We went down to Salem, and we chanted 2468, it's all right to inseminate, 1357, fuck you and your bill, Kevin, to Kevin Mannix, who was eventually to be the Republican nominee for governor later, but at this point was in the Oregon legislature. And we created quite the stir. And there was an article in the paper about a week later. The bill had been killed, and Gail Shibley, who was the first out lesbian and who had been working on the committee to try to kill this bill for weeks and weeks, told the story from the insider perspective. And she said, I'd been trying to kill this bill, and everybody told me, you know, you're a lesbian, you're some whacked out lefty weirdo, and we can't take you credibly because you're too personally involved in this issue and you're way, way, way too far left wing. You represent the fringe, and we're here to do statesman-like work with other legislators. We speak to each other with respect here. You're outside of our norms. I don't listen to your voice, right? So this is what she's told over and over. And then the Lesbian Avengers showed up and said 1357, fuck you and your bill, Kevin. And all of a sudden they were like, wow, we thought you were the fringe. Turns out that you're a nice white lady who wears business suits and has a law degree. And maybe we should have listened to you before things got too weird, right? And so this is the really important understanding is that Gail Shibley was not failing to do activism. She was doing activism. She was doing it from a different place. And she had a certain amount of credibility. And this is the early mid 90s, so her credibility is undercut by being an out lesbian, but not entirely. And by bringing in these outside groups that could really agitate, we highlighted the difference between the far left and Gail Shibley, and allowed Gail Shibley's voice to gain even more credibility. So the Lesbian Avengers could not have killed this bill without a nice, wealthy, middle-class white lady with a law degree sitting on the committee in the legislature. But Gail Shibley had proved to herself that she could try for weeks and weeks and weeks, and she couldn't kill it without the Lesbian Avengers screaming, fuck you and your bill, Kevin. So as you're thinking about what you want to do with your activism, there are many ways to do this. There's no one right way to do this, and we absolutely need them all. So people who might tend to devalue Steph's work because it's not radical enough or loud enough or noisy enough or confrontational enough need to hold their horses. And people who diminish the work of street activists who are way too far left and are never going to get anything done, of course the Lesbian Avengers aren't going to kill that bill. But we made it possible for Gail Shibley to kill that bill. And so the street activists are necessary. There's this whole spectrum of activism that's necessary. And so when you're thinking about what you want to do in terms of participating in activism, there's such a wide range of things you can do. And so it really makes sense to try to figure out what your own strengths are. And whatever your strengths are, there will be a spot for you to fill in.
Okay, you got me wondering though, where these legislators who are protesting about fringe lefties went to when the fringe righties moved in. Because that didn't seem to give them pause at all.
Right?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
A lot of them got primaried. Honestly,
Mm-hmm.
it's no small part of it.
So I want to mention one other thing that was brought up earlier, and that is the importance of these little small contributions that people can make, and that you don't have to do it all by yourself. You don't have to create a new world all on your own. And the lesson I got was when I went to church one day, which I don't usually do, not normally, but I did. We just decided to check out the local churches, and I went to the local Lutheran church, and that particular day they were talking about the church budget. And in the last 6 months, they had just routinely raised $600,000 here in this little tiny Midwestern town. And there's 15 churches here that were all doing the same thing to varying degrees of success. And it just sunk in that, what's doing this is having 50 to 100 people show up every week. And the collection plate floats around and they throw their coins and a few dollar bills in there. And it all adds up. And we don't have anything comparable. There's no regular sort of things where we join together and raise money for a cause, even if the cause seems to be paying off the pastor and building a new roof or whatever. But yeah, that it just told me that there's a lot of power in numbers. Not as much in one little guy, but lots in numbers. William, you got your hands up.
Yeah, I just want to go back to earlier about how we need a mix of activism and kind of an example of what happens when you don't have that. I was involved with a student group that the leadership became more concerned with ideological purity and just doing the protests and staying out of student electoral politics. But at the same time, they had like their paper, their nasty paper, and then they were running candidates, and they're getting on the editorial board of the student newspaper, and just they had the combined activism, and they gained a lot of power while the group I was involved with, decline, was being marginalized. So yeah, I mean, you can't just do protest. You a combined thing of elections and protests and media like blogs or even a publication together. That helps. It takes time, but it can help. And unfortunately, on the right, they know that, and that's why they're having some successes recently.
Okay.
And
Madison
actually,
Page
if you want to get
gave-
into, oh, sorry, go ahead, Stephanie.
I was just going to say, Madison Page gave a great talk at the American Atheists Convention this April. I don't remember the exact title, but basically it's being right is not enough. And she is, among other things, a political consultant and currently on the board of American Atheists. And basically her point is you have to know where the power is, and you don't leave it sitting on the table, assuming you can, otherwise ethically make use of that power. You don't disdain it, because you can be right as much as you want, but that alone isn't going to change things. Sorry, HJ, go on.
I don't know. I was just going to mention probably the easiest way to get into activism is, well, money. I mean, if people have been engaging in activism for longer than you and know the terrain a lot better than you, know the levers of power and what to pull, even just sort of showing up and volunteering to help them with their paperwork and all that, it can be quite useful, but it's not necessarily what they need. Money is sort of our universal currency for buying things, if you donate money, you're allowing activist organizations to spend that in areas where they think it would be most effective. And since they are on the ground and know what to do, presumably they actually know the best way to spend that. So if you aren't, sort of in the mood to sort of get off your chair and, hold signs or come up with really cool chants, by the way, then that actually is probably the easiest, simplest way to go in. And as mentioned, a lot of these organizations are starved of, funds or, resources in general. So even a small donation can actually make quite a difference to these organizations in general.
I would also add to that, don't ignore donating to individuals, because that is one of the places where you can make a lot of difference very quickly. So, for example, giving the person panhandling on the street a pair of socks and $10 goes a lot further than your $10 will in a lot of other places, because it is going to one person who knows best exactly what they need. And can get it in that moment.
Okay. Stephanie, you mentioned American Atheists a bit ago,
Yes.
and that's kind of interest to me as a possible avenue, because several years ago, as many of us did, I ran screaming away from any atheist organization, except Minnesota Atheists. They're pretty good, but the others.
Also, you had a life membership already, so
Yeah, and I'd live far away from everything too, which doesn't help. But anyway, is that something we should be encouraging? Is more participation in organizations like Freedom from Religion Foundation, American Atheists, American Humanists? Is that one of the things that a bunch of bloggers could do, is do more to promote these kinds of organizations?
I think so. Although I, will say, obviously, there are organizations that are still hanging on to the old ways tooth and nail. So a better, in fact, Christian in the chat mentioned Shermer. I wouldn't ever donate to the Skeptic Society. What I would suggest doing as an individual, and particularly if you got yourself badly burned back in the old days, is go out to the orgs and look at what they're doing. Look at what they are asking you for money to do. Look at what they're telling you that they are accomplishing. Because by and large, you will find that those organizations, well, let's just say we won. It's hard to believe still at this point, even for me. But the organized atheism culture war went to the humanists, and not just the humanists who are calling themselves humanists because atheist is a bad word. These are people who, yes, absolutely still fighting Christian nationalism because we have to. It's a major political problem in the US right now. But they are, for example, standing up for trans people, because that is who the Christian nationalists are turning into their latest target and trying to fundraise money off of. Once they lost on same-sex marriage, the Christian right decided they needed a new group of people to turn to blame everything on, and it's trans people. And they're literally out there calling trans people groomers, which is exactly what they did for gay people many years ago, but basically suggesting they should have no contact whatsoever with children. They are out there arguing that if a girl is good at sports, somebody should have a good look at her genitals and make sure that she's really a girl, which is horrifying. Yes, several of the organizations are working quite hard on trans rights. Some of them have trans people and non-binary people in significant positions of power. American Atheists is one of those. One of their vice presidents is a trans woman, Allison Gill, and does great and amazing work, and we should all help her because I'm pretty sure she does too much of it. Other organizations like what was Foundation Beyond Belief, they had got new leadership about a year and a half ago at this point, maybe 2 years, who has rethought just about everything about how they do business. They've renamed themselves. They're now Go Humanity, which is short for, I'm blanking on it. But basically they are doing, rather than getting students together and sending them off to some foreign country to do aid projects in the summer, they're taking those students who want to help in their off time and doing disaster relief right here in the US, because it's not as though we don't have our own poor communities that are just devastated by climate change. They are, yeah, go check them out. They're doing cool stuff. And you won't know the name unless you actually like spend some time with it. So go Humanity. It's way less cheesy than it sounds if you've been in atheist activism for a while. American Humanist Association has a new executive director, Nadia Dutchin, who is wonderful. And I don't just say that because she's from Minneapolis, but she literally walked into a leadership meeting this spring and told the leaders of the other secular organizations that she was shaking things up and they were going to have to get used to it. Still settling down in terms of exactly what they're going to be doing as their main thrust, because it's a very, very complicated organization. But direct grant making to community organizations, the ones that we've been talking about where you can make so much difference with a small amount of money, is definitely one of the things that's on their list. This isn't your intellectual, uninvolved humanism that you may be familiar with from a few years ago. I feel like I'm missing some other big national stuff. But if you go out and you look at what they're doing and, you know, you maybe sign up for their emails or their action alerts, even organizations I don't particularly care for, still send important action alerts where you can add your name to HJ reminds me I should talk about Secular Woman. Right now, we're not doing anything terribly showy, but it's, I think, not a coincidence that a lot of the new leaders are female or non-binary. And so we're doing what we can to help make sure that they have the support they need to not to just be run straight back out of the movement, because we've certainly seen that before. But yeah, go out there, sign up for action alerts, take a look at their news, see if they're doing things you like, and if they are, support that.
Yeah, you know, this is actually kind of reassuring, which is a very unusual feeling for me, because like I said, I kind of fled everything. But I've had the same impression that somehow, maybe it was my fault and just leaving helped, but that there was so much change.
Never left, PZ.
Well, I stopped pushing so much, but yeah,
Yes.
yeah, but yeah, that what I was hearing was all these changes behind the scenes that where they actually seem to be acknowledging and doing something about the things I had complained about for years.
And
So,
working in coalition with other organizations. Abortion, been a big issue. This is not the same movement where 6-7 years ago, one particular head of an organization was like, do we even need to have a position on this? I'm sure there's room for disagreement. So, yeah.
yes. Yeah, I mean, I saw exactly the same thing in so-called organized skepticism, where they seem to be dedicated to avoiding anything that was smacked of a contemporary social issue. No, we don't do that. We just debunk ghosts and dowsing, and that was it. So I'm glad to see that atheism has gotten out of that rut. And
can I add?
Yeah,
I read some summary of a study that showed that in a field where there's very much dominated by big personalities, when that personality dies, that's actually where the big advancements are in that field after a while. And I think that actually might have been a bit of the case here, when some of the big names kind of dropped out, either by, well, the natural causes or by action, kind of left the room for everybody else. And those of us who kind of left a little bit too early might not have been too noticed so much. So it's very nice to hear this. Definitely, I'm definitely going to look into what's new compared to when the rest of us were last active.
Yeah, I mean, there are still plenty of atheist celebrities who are still atheist celebrities and are still terrible or working to reach new heights of being terrible. But the actual organized atheism that was supposedly always there to do the work and not just raise the profile of celebrities, that's a lot different.
Yeah, a lot of the problem I think years ago was that we fostered this cult of celebrity, and that's not how it should work. That no, the individuals
Turns out
suck.
that's bad activism.
Yeah.
If somebody wants to know what bad activism is, celebrity activism is not good. It's not a strong base.
Okay. So we are getting close to the end here. Sarah's got something to say though. Charge in.
Oh, sorry, this was a fairly quick point, but because there's been a lot of focus here on what can we do as atheists or as part of atheist organizations, I'm not sure if it's been mentioned, but I just wanted to stress it also doesn't have to be just about joining atheist organizations, or it doesn't have to be about joining atheist organizations at all. It doesn't have to be about your beliefs on the matter of religion. There are so many organizations out there fighting for gay rights, trans rights, others, anti-racism, other social justice causes, things that are not things that are organizations that don't bring belief or lack thereof into it. They're about, okay, this is an important cause, let's sign up and speak out for it. And for some people that's the way they want to go. For me, I know I think the fact that I'm an atheist is irrelevant to my beliefs on social justice. This is stuff that needs doing in the world, and I want to be able to go out and do it. So remember, there are all those organizations out there who do this. There's also in the US, and I particularly want to stress this because of all the problems with gerrymandering and the concerns about how democracy is being eroded and taken away. There are some excellent organizations out there that are actively fighting to keep people's votes and to help people to overcome the barriers to voting and to help people get out there and voting, because the US desperately needs a blue wave of never before seen proportions. So there are organizations that work actively towards those, and I think all of those are very good places where people can put their time, their money, their effort, their activism, completely regardless of belief. That's where you can put your activism.
I agree with that with two caveats, and they're both based on the fact that things are different in the US than in the UK. The first is that a lot of these organizations use religion and religious people for respectability. So atheists might not find a very comfortable home there. Related to that, there are things on these issues where atheists already being the bad guys in a lot of these coalitions can do that unpopular thing, like Cryptike was talking about, and stake out the position that is simply, if we start at this from no assumed religious moral background, this is where we would actually be. And this is an important thing. And the broader coalitions leaning on religion can't necessarily do that.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's important to be able to stand up and say, I'm an atheist and I support social justice.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, years ago, one of the things that really impressed me is, I had this network of friends in the atheist movement, and what were they talking about? They were doing things like volunteering as clinic escorts, or they were working in soup kitchens, just volunteering their time there. And they didn't do it to advertise atheism. They did it because it's the right thing to do. And so I feel that's also a good thing to do, is just find a cause you care about and volunteer and do it. Okay, do we have any last thoughts from anybody that they want to bring up before we should close up here in just a minute or two?
I'd love to just say that a lot of attention goes to those of us who are arrested or tear gassed or whatever. Certainly, those forms of activism have been present in the United States and Canada. Canada's a little bit different. We tend to have less confrontational activism, except when Indigenous people and Indigenous rights are involved. And then the government and the activists become much more directly opposed to each other. You can see how in Ottawa there was a reluctance to arrest or otherwise interact with the people who were protesting with their caravan a few months back. But there's a lot of attention on those people, and I think that one more reminder would not go amiss, that that community norms play out everywhere, and therefore activism has a place everywhere, whether that's, in a faculty committee meeting, or whether that's sitting around the lunch table when somebody's using a stereotype or an offensive word, or all of these places are places for activism. And these are not less legitimate. These are all places where the status quos are upheld, and therefore they are all places where you can intervene to change the status quo.
Okay, very good. Anyone else? Okay, let me just say that the one thing I've taken away from this is maybe I ought to reforge connections with these organizations. That this is a good place to start, is just to find something bigger than yourself and contribute to that and build up. So maybe I'm going to have to go to a Minnesota atheist meeting sometime. I don't know. It's an awful long way. And maybe renew my connections with American atheists or American humanists or something. But I'll start thinking about that some more. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for coming by and listening to us. Thank you, Stephanie, for making this special appearance for us and helping us out with this stuff. And with that, I will say goodbye, good night, so long. We'll see you all next month. And HJ, take it away.